Hello there, this is going to be an interesting session. We will take a peek under the hood and help you understand internals very well. We will see logging dependencies on class path, their purpose, how logs are routed, and what happens in case when dependencies are excluded. So let's begin. So when you run your Spring Boot application, there are some loggers in your application code which you or your team have put it in place. And there are a few loggers which are already present inside the Spring Boot jars. Okay. So what happens when your application is running and you are having a Spring Boot logging starter on your class path? What happens? Your application code logs your file to the SLF4J. So what it means? Your application pass your logs to the SLF4J. Okay. Your Spring Boot internals, these logs are passed to the Spring JCL. Okay, this is another dependencies on the class path. Spring JCL delegates the logs to SLF4J. SLF4J binds to LogBack. There is a configuration file either through the application.properties as we have seen in the previous session, or another way through the LogBack configuration file. So there is a mechanism to configure the LogBack, and once everything is in place, your application is ready to log the files on the console, in the file, depending upon the configuration done here. So this is the routing of the logs which happens apart from Spring Boot libraries and your application code. There are few other jars which also want to route their logs. We will see few things in this session, and in coming sessions we will cover that part also in the depth, so don't worry about it. This is the Spring application which we are using for our demo. Let's run this command Maven dependency tree, and what it will do, it will give you a tree of all the dependencies on the class path. Okay, so if I show you from here, it is a Spring Boot starter with Flux. This pulls in Spring Boot starter, and what your starter pulls in Spring Boot, Spring Context, AOP, expression. Same way, your Spring Boot starter pulls in Spring Boot starter logging. So that's what I was talking about. When your Spring Boot starter logging is on class path, your LogBack classic is on your path, your LogBack core is on your path, and you can see there are log4j to SLF4J is also on path, log4j API is also on path. So we will not cover these in today's session, but as I have told you, we will go in depth of these also. But if you see here, there is another one, Joule to SLF4J. There is one another important jar. I will show you Spring JCL, right? So here in our diagram, we have seen Spring Boot routes its logs to Spring JCL. So it is important Spring JCL is on path. And if you see this tree, Spring core itself pulls in the Spring JCL. So what I have done, I have copied all this big dependency tree and have already filtered out all the logs which are related to logging. I will show you here. Okay, so this page and this page. Let's start from here. So Spring Boot starter logging, of course, we have seen LogBack Classic is on the path. What Spring Boot starter do? It provides default logging setup with SLF4J and LogBack, plus it bridges for other logging framework. So when it says bridges for other logging framework, it's it is talking about log4j and other stuff. Please have a look at previous sessions. There I have shown how SLF4J can work with other frameworks also. Okay, covered the theoretical part there. So LogBack classic jar, and it depends on LogBack core. So LogBack Classic needs LogBack core, and basically this is a LogBack implementation, and LogBack core is the core of the LogBack's logging system. So basically these are related to LogBack. Log4j to SLF4J, what it do? So there might be some jars which are using log4j to, so how these logs will be printed. So this is the bridge library. Same way log4j API is there to support the bridging. And Joule to SLF4J, Java utility logging or Java util logging. It's Java util logging. This is also a bridging library in our case. Same way SLF4J API. No, SLF4J is not the bridging. It's very important one. We need, since our classes use SLF4J APIs, right? So this is very important one. Spring JCL, yes, this is also very important one. If it is not on the class path, we will see what happens. Let us open the form files. Okay, so here we can see Spring Boot starter is pulled by Spring Boot starter logging is pulled by Spring Boot starter and webflux. So it is a dependency of webflux. Let's do one thing. Let's go here. Let's do the exclusion, which, okay, Spring Framework, Spring Boot starter logging. Let's exclude this one. This is the group. Okay, let's build this and see what happens. Okay, that is gone. Now let's see if it is present somewhere else. Okay, so Spring Boot core is present here also, but it have a Spring JCL only. Okay, let's see logging. I cannot see anything here. Let's go here and see what is. Okay, that sounds good. Maybe let me find something which I can. I'm sure we should have Spring JCL. Okay, so we can see Spring JCL is still on the path. Okay, so we have removed the starter, logging starter. Let's go back. Okay, so now this is not available on the path. Let's do one thing. Let's just remove these loggers because I cannot log without SLF4J. I will remove from these classes also. Now from not so nice class also. I'm just trying to bring it in the compilable state and we will see something important. Okay, so now my application I think can compile and all the loggers are gone. Now let's see my application properties. What is there? Yeah, so my console logging is in place, everything is in place. The properties, let's start. Okay, so application is starting. I can see some logs here. Okay, so I have already removed the log back just to be sure. You want me to run the dependency tree again? Let's do it. Let me find the log back. It's not here, right? SLF4J. SLF4J API is still there, but it is in test and scope of test is test. So it's not a problem. So now the question is why I can see some logs still. Okay, where is my application? Let's start it again. Okay, so why I can still see the logs? Okay, because if you have followed the previous session well, you know that Spring Boot logs to Spring JCL. Spring JCL is still on the class path. Spring JCL try to find SLF4J, and if SLF4J is not on the class path, then finally Spring JCL will depend upon java.util.logging. Java util logging JUL. And if I show you JUL, if it is here, Joule to SLF4J. Okay, so this is bridge library. This is not we are talking about. What I am talking about is java.util util dot okay. So java.util.logging. This is still on the class path. So when it is not able to find anything, it depends upon Java util logging. What if somehow this is also not present? This should be, but let's say if it is not present, then Spring JCL finally, you know, it uses no ops logger and it do not log anything. So Spring JCL is there on the class path. It will keep on working. Logs may not be printed. One interesting thing, if I go back to our POM file and if I say, let's remove the Spring JCL itself. Okay, Spring JCL. Let's build it again. Now let's check on the path if a Spring JCL is there. Okay, so we can still see it here. Not sure why. Maybe it is from where it can come. Let's check. Spring Boot core. Okay. Spring Boot starter test. Spring JCL is here. And where else? Okay, let's try to exclude it from here also. Although this is just a test scope, let's do one thing. Let's try to start the application and see what happens. Okay, it still starts. Remove it. Let's check dependency tree. Where else we can find it? Okay, so here Spring Core, Spring Boot test. So it is coming from Spring Boot starter test only. Scope is test, but let's do one thing. Let's exclude here also. Spring JCL here, and it should be completely gone. You can still see it. Why? Let's exclude it from here. We excluded from reactor test. It was never coming from reactor test. Okay, so I think it is gone now. Spring JCL. Okay, so it's gone completely. We cannot find it. Let's try to restart the application. Let's see what surprise it gives. Okay, so here it comes. It says it cannot find Apache Commons logging factory, log factory. So basically, a Spring JCL is like very mandatory jar. And if I go back to this diagram, and if I go back to this preview here, Spring JCL. So this is Spring's custom project. Basically, what they did, most likely they forked the Jakarta Commons logging implementation, and they have done some modifications, and they are now managing it for their own framework, and it helps them avoiding the conflicts with the Jakarta changes. Stay tuned for the more in-depth sessions in this series. Leave comments if you do not like something, if something is not clear, or if you want me to cover something else in the upcoming sessions. Happy learning. Good night.